Etna. A warm welcome to everyone joining us from around the world. I'm Jennifer Gnana, Energy Correspondent for the National based here in the UAE. We're convening this discussion against the backdrop of a remarkable transition in global energy. Calls for a swift adoption of renewables in the developed and developing world have been set in motion decades ago. The Paris Agreement further hastened the commitments of countries to a cleaner, more sustainable energy mix. The International Energy Agency's Fateh Birol said yesterday that amongst the disastrous events of last year, the only silver lining was the fact that renewables continued to grow and continue to remain a sector that economies will continually invest in. Global emissions for last year fell by a significant 7%, and countries around the world are being urged by institutions such as the IEA, the International Renewable Energy Agency based here in Abu Dhabi, to capitalize on the gains made during the gains made in energy transition during the pandemic, and they've asked for policymakers to push through sustainable green recovery packages. Here in the Middle East, governments have already stepped up their post-pandemic recovery plans by pledging to add more renewable capacity to grids. They pledged to lower their carbon emissions. And they're also fast-tracking development of new technology, such as hydrogen, so that the region continues to export energy in some form or the other for the foreseeable future. In this session, we're going to hear from the region's top experts on how the Middle East is navigating this pivotal transition in the global economy. I'm honored to introduce our panelists. Her Excellency Hala Zawati, Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources of the Kingdom of Jordan. Yousif Al-Ali, Executive Director, Clean Energy at Masdar here in Abu Dhabi. Ahmad Al-Khowaiter, Chief Technical Officer of Saudi Aramco. Caspar Herzberg, President, Middle East and North Africa at Schneider Electric. Jean-François Seznec, Non-Resident Senior Fellow, Global Energy Center of the Atlantic Council. Welcome to all. I'm going to begin with Her Excellency. Jordan is one of the pioneers when it comes to renewable energy transition here in the Middle East. The country is a trailblazer in terms of the transition and has been adding a significant chunk of solar capacity. It also has significant wind capacity as well, and has been looking at other forms of energy. With solar, for instance, is going to be as high as 2.75 gigawatts by the end of this year. Minister, could you talk to us a little bit about Jordan's energy mix and what critical role renewables have been playing in powering your economy?
I'd like to thank you as a start. Thank you for the Atlantic Council in organizing these sessions regarding energy transition towards a more sustainable, less fossil, more clean, less carbon emission energy in the world. This is very important for us in Jordan, and I am proud for the introduction that you have made. And yes, we are proud as Jordan to be among the first in the Middle East and North Africa to go towards renewable energy. Our journey started in 2012, 2013. We had a low, and since then we moved from 1% of electricity generated from renewables to today, where we're talking about around 19%, and hopefully in very few months we will reach the 20% we were aiming for. So indeed, renewable energy has made a significant shift for us. And we believe as citizens of the world, every one of us, our country, that we need to move towards decarbonization, zero emissions, less emissions as much as possible. And we are proud that today in our electricity generation, we're using one of the cleanest sources for generating electricity. Today, as I said, around 19% comes from renewable energy, and the rest is generated from natural gas. So we don't have coal, we don't use heavy fuel, we don't use diesel. And gradually we're shifting to more renewable energy. Our plans are towards around 31% in 2030. And please remember that Jordan is a country that's mainly focusing on solar and wind. So none of these can act as a base load. And we're doing our best in order to integrate storage in the coming few years in order to be able to take more and more. One more thing we allowed and permitted in Jordan is for the consumer to generate their own electricity, which was an enabler like for industries and different productive sectors, because with the decrease in the prices of solar energy and being a country that is blessed with sunshine almost all the year, we only have around 30 rainy days. So they are able today to generate electricity, which is clean, green, and very feasible for their businesses. So again, I'm really happy and proud to be sitting here today among you all to speak of this success story in Jordan. It's in its energy transition towards more clean and energy in its energy mix.
Thank you, Your Excellency. A reminder to our audience that you can submit questions to our panelists through the chat option on the web app. Now, turning to Yousif, who is the head of the Clean Energy Department at Masdar, which has steadily built up an incredible footprint of renewable energy projects in wind, in solar, waste to energy, both here in the UAE, in neighboring Saudi Arabia, where they've expanded their role. They're, of course, present in several other parts of the world and continuously expanding, more recently in Poland. Yousif, how has the pandemic refocused priorities for Masdar in terms of its renewable energy portfolio?
Jennifer, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. I'm very glad to be with such distinguished panelists. COVID-19 exposed us to a lot of challenges. And when I speak about these challenges in the renewable energy projects, in the development of the renewable energy projects, the biggest difficulty was mainly in the construction works. So due to the cross-border limitations, transportation limitations, we face a lot of delays in the projects under construction. The good thing during this pandemic that everybody got together. So not the developers alone, we have the developers, the contractors, the lenders, the clients, the governments where we build projects for them. All of them got together in order to overcome the challenges that raised due to COVID-19. So we faced delays in the project. This is natural, but in general, we were able to overcome these challenges and continue the construction works and achieve commercial operation projects for many projects that we have. One of them is with Jordan, with the support of Her Excellency, the minister from Jordan, Al-Zawati. Thank you very much. So all of us got together and we were able to continue. On terms of on the development side, on the other side of planning for renewable energy, we witnessed an increasing plan for more renewable energy capacities, and this is mainly driven by the economical attractiveness of these projects. We've seen this year a new round of renewable energy projects happening in Saudi Arabia. We've seen new rounds of renewable energy projects happening in Central Asia, in Uzbekistan, in Azerbaijan. We are engaged in projects also beyond renewable energy. We are engaged in projects with storage technologies. We are engaged in projects with waste to energy technologies. We are exploring more technologies for the future related to hydrogen production. So I think, yes, it's a difficult time that we passed through due to the pandemic, but we went through it. And we still continue to grow our renewable energy position. So for Masdar, after this pandemic, yes, we learned a lot. We'll continue to improving our position in our existing markets. We will continue being closer to our client to explore more future technologies that can help them to overcome their challenges.
Thank you, Yousif. Moving on to Ahmad. Now, Saudi Aramco is the world's largest oil exporting company, and the kingdom, as well as its biggest national asset, have taken increasingly bold steps towards sustainability. As Saudi Aramco, what steps are you taking at the moment to shift gears to a renewable future for the kingdom?
Thank you. In fact, the kingdom has had a long history of leadership in energy, as you've said, and we've moved in the past from oil to natural gas, and today, as you can see, the kingdom is a leader as well in the implementation of renewable energy. We at Saudi Aramco believe in the affordability of energy, but as well the sustainability of energy, and therefore we think that long term we must be able to provide the markets with the products that they require. And as we've seen with our oil, for example, we have invested many years, long before the concerns globally around emissions, in the cleanliness of our product. So we have today the lowest carbon footprint associated with production of our oil than any other major oil producer in the world. So for example, we have about 10 kilograms of CO2 emitted with every barrel of oil we produce, which is far lower than the global average, which ranges between 40 and 60 kilograms. And that's because we invested long ago in the 70s, late 70s, mainly in capturing the associated gas, which had zero value at the time, but for environmental reasons and what turned out to be great economic reasons. And for that kind of a long-term view of the future is what's needed today for the energy industry. And we believe the same way regarding CO2 and emissions. We are investing today for the long term. First, in the efficiency of our own existing hydrocarbon production, but also in developing new uses that are lower emission uses of the resources we have. For example, our hydrocarbons, the uses of hydrocarbons go beyond energy. We have a major program in what is called crude to chemicals, because chemicals is a major growth area, and it's actually necessary. The materials of the transition are mainly polymers and carbon-based products, which allow what we see in terms of efficient, new, low emissions technologies. And so we are transitioning also our product mix to be a lower emission product mix. So that's one element. The second element, of course, and the critical element, is we're even getting more efficient in our production. So we're investing in even more efficient production of oil, and that includes renewable energy that if it is economically competitive. And as we've seen today, renewable energy is a lower cost option for the production of electricity in many cases, and therefore we'll see more and more adoption of renewable energy at larger scale in the kingdom and with Aramco as well. So we're expecting also to transition to lower carbon footprint products in addition to the conventional hydrocarbons. As we've demonstrated back in September, we'll be producing carbon-free products for the market through technologies like carbon capture. So in September, we demonstrated by piloting the first shipment of carbon-free hydrogen, or blue hydrogen in the terminology. That's by producing ammonia and capturing the CO2 associated with that production and shipping it to Japan, where it was utilized in power generation. So that's the kind of products that we see entering our energy mix that converts the extremely competitive hydrocarbon resources into two main products: materials in the form of carbon-based high-performance materials, and hydrogen, which then becomes an energy carrier. So this is where we see the future of the hydrocarbon industry ultimately, that we'll be seeing lower and lower carbon footprint products through technologies such as carbon capture and sequestration, as well as conversion of hydrocarbons to more valuable materials. This is the future that we see. It'll take a lot of investment, and we are, as you know, we've been investing. We're the leaders in the carbon capture in the region. We established our first carbon capture project in 2015, where we inject about 800,000 tons a year of CO2 into an oil field. So we are expanding that technology as we speak. We are developing new technologies in that area, and we hope to be able to demonstrate a real, growth beyond the products we have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. I'm going to circle back to hydrogen, which has become increasingly important here in the Middle East, especially in the UAE. We've seen a number of deals being signed and top players in the country forming an alliance to transform the country into an export hub for hydrogen. We'll come back to that later, but I'm going to move on to Caspar, and I'll be starting with your recent announcement, which only just came through 2 hours ago. You signed an agreement with Abu Dhabi's Mubadala investment company to collaborate in the areas of clean, sustainable, and innovative energy solutions. And you also mentioned a manufacturing component for that here in the UAE. How important is technology in enabling this energy transition here in the region?
Thank you for that. Thank you for having me. And it was indeed a great honor today to sign this MOU. I mean, we've been very fortunate to be a partner of Masdar and other leading UAE institutions in leaders in sustainability, some of the true sustainability pioneers, if you like. And what we want to do with want to explore in the MOU is how can we take that knowledge? How can we take these lessons learned? How can we offer sustainable energy as a service in Europe and in Africa? Think mini grids, think obviously the huge opportunity, the challenge in Africa, the 600 million people without access to energy. But also in Europe, increasingly the need to get sustainable energy as a service, right? So we see a lot of opportunity in this market, and we're very fortunate that we have great partners like Mubadala with the Emirati entrepreneurial spirit, and of course a huge footprint across the entire world, but especially in EMEA, with whom we can do that. And yes, indeed, part of the MOU is also to look at our footprint here in the region. I mean, we've been here 40 years, but one can always do more. And looking at manufacturing some of those components potentially here in Abu Dhabi. So that is what we are looking at. You asked me about technology in creating, in supporting the transition. And I mean, since COVID is on our mind and we talk a lot about vaccines, I mean, clearly technology is not the vaccine, but it's certainly a key enabler of efficiency. And it's the combination really of IoT, the Internet of Things, of big data, the ability to analyze a lot of data, and artificial intelligence that allows us to significantly reduce the energy, electricity consumption of some of the core drivers of electricity, right? So digitization with all the data centers is a core driver of future energy demand. I mean, this is clear, right? Reducing that by getting a better handle on the cooling of data centers using less electricity is clearly a key, often overlooked component of reducing energy consumption. Then we are in the region that has urbanized like few others. I mean, China is maybe a competitor. Clearly, the combination of smart buildings, smart cities, again, this is a region with a lot of early adoption, a lot of early technology. And this is not just complex building management systems in huge hotels or hospitals. This is even very simple technologies that simply allow you to automatically turn off the light as you leave the room. I mean, simple things like that can generate huge savings. And the last one I would say, of course, are the huge plants, the water treatment, desalination plants and others, where again, with a combination of technologies, you can reduce energy. So these are all core components to overall reduce energy consumption so that we can redirect this almost like an investment, this energy that becomes free, I didn't mention smart grids, into those areas where you want to grow, where you need more.
Also, Caspar, you mentioned in your agreement a manufacturing component. Now, to service the renewable industry so far in the Middle East, the region has largely imported much of the equipment needed to support the sector. What sort of manufacturing component could we possibly see as a result of this? And do you see potential for that here in the region?
Well, there definitely is potential. I mean, we actually do manufacture in the region. We manufacture in Saudi Arabia. We manufacture in other Middle Eastern countries. We manufacture in Algeria. We manufacture in Kenya for the African market. So we are quite focused on increasing that footprint wherever it makes sense. Clearly, renewables are not just at multiples, through maintaining it, etc. They also create jobs through the actual manufacturing of the components, and this is one thing that we are here in Abu Dhabi. Now, what that exactly will be is what we will explore in the MOU in the next 6 months or so, and you will hear more from us.
Thank you. Moving over to Jean-François, who has written an excellent paper for the Atlantic Council with Samar Moses called Energy Transition in the Gulf, Myth and Reality, where they talk about CCUS and other new innovative strategies that are being implemented across different countries. Jean-François, could you give us your critical appraisal of the energy transition initiatives being taken by oil-producing countries here in the Middle East, drawing upon this report?
Well, thank you very much. And it is quite an honor to be with my panelists, who are all wonderful and very knowledgeable people, much more knowledgeable than I will ever be. So I feel very humbled approaching this a little bit. But yes, my colleague Samir Moses and myself wrote this paper, which is more of a general analysis of the approach and the policies of renewables and net zero in the Middle East. But just very quickly, the way we were looking at it, and again, it's more of a 10,000 feet view of the issue. But there are four main prongs of the transition today in the Gulf in particular. Our focus was on the Gulf mostly. But of course, there's renewables, which is very important because the region has an enormous advantage in the solar, and especially in Jordan, as we heard from Her Excellency, is doing fabulously well on this. But in the Gulf itself, at this point, the renewables are actually very small. There's a lot of plans. The total renewables today production is only 2.8 gigawatts and most of that is in Abu Dhabi. So there are many projects, of course, with 4.7 gigawatts coming in the next few months, and another 5 in a few months later. But besides the renewables, I think there's, as Ahmad just mentioned, there's an enormous effort in the region to develop carbon capture and storage. And there is, of course, the big project in Saudi Arabia, which has existed since 2015. There's a similar one in the UAE, and I'm sure there will be many more to come. But there is a natural advantage to Saudi Arabia and the UAE to develop this much further, because not only can they capture the CO2, but they can store it. And a lot of the problems which CO2 provides is that, or gives us, is that, yes, you can remove the CO2, but what do you do with it? And if you cannot, most of it would be buried. And if you can put it back in the oil fields, which are getting weak themselves, then it's a great advantage. Now in the UAE, of course, you have the nuclear effort, which has been remarkable, truly, and which has not been followed yet by the others. So there's some plans in Saudi Arabia, but a lot of talk, but not much action in Saudi on these matters.
Sure.
There's a point which Ahmed mentioned, and which I really would love to hear more from him, is on the crude to chemical issue. That's the project in Saudi Arabia, which could revolutionize the world, really. And the $20 billion project, as far as I can tell, but it has offs and ons. Last I heard it was off. I don't know whether it's on. So maybe you can tell us more about this. This is really great. But the main point I wanted to make in our paper, was that really the Gulf countries have a great advantage in the sense that they have so many natural advantages in terms of the sun, in terms of their ability to produce very cheap carbons, to have the fields nearby, and and a lot of capital where they don't have to borrow piles of money in order to do their projects. They can really become as dominant in net zero emission technologies as they are today in hydrocarbons. And that's really the future for the Gulf in many ways. If they can actually not only be technology takers in renewables and net zero emission, but really become technology sellers and givers, then little by little they can replace their own income from hydrocarbons. So between the chemicals, which is of course enormous. I mean, Saudi Arabia today is the second or third, maybe fourth largest producer of chemicals in the world. Then, excuse me, between the chemicals and the ability to sell technology which they develop themselves, I think that will be quite advantageous for the whole region. This is not as easy as all that, because to develop the technology, you need to have enormous research and development expenses. Saudi Aramco is at the forefront of this, has been for the last 30 years. And so it's really quite wonderful to see that. But that has to be multiplied by many times over in order to be successful and to become an exporter of technology. So many of the universities in Saudi Arabia in particular are pushing this extensively. And I believe they will be very successful in this. But it takes the ability to build the technology, takes the research and development. You have to buy a lot of companies abroad and bring joint venture partners, as our friend from Schneider just mentioned, and it's being done in the UAE extensively. So I believe that there is a lot of possibilities. I think the Gulf will become a leader and can replace its own dominance in hydrocarbon by the dominance in the selling of technology in net zero emission. It's very important to not just focus on just renewables, but renewables and net zero emission, as the kingdom is trying to do right now, as was mentioned by the king not so long ago, and really become develop its ability to further to become major providers of technology worldwide. So that talks about hydrogen, but I think Jennifer will talk about that later. So maybe I'll just would love to hear more what everyone else has to say. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jean-François. You've raised a number of interesting points about CCUS and new uses for oil, which we'll be putting to our panelists a bit later. We have a question from our audience. The question is, as oil and gas declines, how will the region work to continue in its role as a critical supplier of energy to the rest of the world through hydrogen production, electricity export, solar or wind, or another route? Jean-François covered a little bit of that. I was wondering if Her Excellency would like to share her thoughts on newer forms of energy export from the region as fossil fuels decline.
It's funny that you're asking me. We're a country among most of the countries in the region which is not actually producing fossil fuel or even natural gas in the amounts that is produced in the Gulf countries and Saudi Arabia. But it's also ironic that we have started generating renewable energy from a local resource. And today we're seeing ourselves discussing a connection with Saudi Arabia for exchange of energy during different times of the day, during different times of the years. And though we as Jordan, we're not an energy producer, yet for the first time in Jordan's kind of history, we're producing local energy from local resources. So do I see kind of a replacement of or gradually an increase in energy production from renewables and from hydrogen? Definitely we're seeing that. Is it only because we're moving towards a net zero emissions? One of the reasons is yes. The other reason is that economically it seems to be feasible. And the third reason, and actually we've seen that in COVID, when at some point we were afraid that the supply of gas would be cut because of any reason related to COVID, then what would we be doing? So for security reasons, for economic reasons, and for the net zero emissions objectives that we all have, yes, I do see renewables and hydrogen coming into the picture, and more and more of electricity generation specifically would be depending on these two sources. In addition, we're seeing the move around the world towards more electric transportation, electric vehicles. So then again, renewables have to play a big role in that. And for those countries who are not oil producers or gas producers, this will give them more and more energy independence. And that is key to any person who's responsible for the country.
And Your Excellency, Jordan is part of the GCC interconnection grid. Now, there are also interconnections with Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the West Bank, and you know, even plans were considered to supply Syria, for instance. Do you envisage a future where there will be a system in place where excess renewable power from additional capacity in countries like yours will help to meet shortages across the region?
Yeah, well, if you remember, I said that our goals towards 2030 is 31% of renewable energy, and we're around 20% today. And that's one of the main reasons, is that we're not interconnected like the European countries with the countries around them. And this causes us a problem with excess generation during daytime, during summertime. And therefore, today we are aiming to be a hub for energy, let's say, exchange of energy among these countries that you have pinpointed. So today we have a connection with Egypt, and we are seeking to increase that capacity. We have a memorandum of understanding with Saudi Arabia to build a line between us and Saudi. We're also discussing with the GCC countries so that the network of the GCC countries passes through Jordan and from Jordan to Egypt. In addition, today we are strengthening the links to Palestine, and as well we're building a connection with Iraq in order to be able to export this electricity to Iraq. We're also discussing with Lebanon the opportunities of passing electricity to Lebanon through Syria. So yes, the more we are able to connect to all these grids, the more we will be able to generate renewable energy, and thus, for a change, maybe sometime we will be able to export it to neighboring countries.
And moving on to Yousif, I had the pleasure of interviewing Yousif for The National. The interview was published, and you can see that on our website. And you mentioned how Masdar is helping a number of countries in developing a green post-pandemic recovery plan. And you mentioned in particular countries in the CIS. You've been very active in Uzbekistan. Could you elaborate a bit more on Masdar's role in such green recovery programs?
Jennifer, as a developer, in order to have a competitive edge, we need to come with solutions that is tailored for the requirement of the clients. In some markets, in some countries, you have limitations. For example, I give you the example of Indonesia. Indonesia is not an easy place to find land, because you will be either cutting forest or will be competing with agriculture. So there, with our partnership in Indonesia, we came up with a floating PV solution. We're progressing very well to make floating PV at large scale bankable, and we are heading toward financial close in the next few months. So this is part of the solutions that we are bringing. Another example also, I want to be aware about Masdar's beyond solar and wind. Another example that we are really proud of, Riyadh project. It's a project that we developed together with ADNOC early in 2015. It's a CO2 capturing plant. It's the first commercial CO2 capturing plant that is in operation now. We are capturing in Abu Dhabi 800,000 tons of CO2. Besides that, we have number of ideas that we are developing. Another example is our floating offshore project in Scotland. You have high potential for offshore wind in many geographies, in Japan, in US, but the water is too much deep. So together with our partner, we came up with a demonstration for floating offshore, another commercial project that we put forward. Besides that, other than the technological innovation, I can mention the project first of its kind in the region, the first of its kind waste to energy project that is under construction now in Sharjah to be like a pilot project for the region. It's a large scale utility scale project, but can be like an example for all the countries here in the region to follow the same principles. So this is how Masdar is trying to position itself as a competitive, smart developer. The competition is strong. Masdar is not alone. I think that the market is fortunate that other developers also in the market, and also they are thinking outside the box. Besides the developers, you have the technology providers, the companies like Schneider's, which strive to give a solution that is helping others to be more competitive economically, to be more reliable. in terms of power production. So we have many of these partnerships. I mentioned before in the interview with you, Jennifer, Central Asia. We're building now huge capacities in solar and wind in Uzbekistan with the support of the government in Uzbekistan, in Azerbaijan, in different places in the world. We are building these projects.
We only have about 16 minutes left. So, and I'd like to hear thoughts about net zero targets possibly being set for the region. But I'm going to stick with Yousif. In a few hours from now, Joe Biden will be inaugurated as the 46th president of the United States. And in our interview, you called the US the biggest accessible market in terms of renewable energy. And we're seeing an interesting development where the Middle East is exporting renewable technology as opposed to oil from a few years ago. And you also mentioned that you're very keen to develop greenfield projects in the US. And as part of his initial 100 days, he plans to rejoin the Paris Agreement, and he also plans to push through a $2 trillion green energy agenda targeting clean building, transportation sectors. Are there plans in Masdar to significantly expand the US portfolio on the back of the incoming administration's $2 trillion green agenda?
Definitely, Jennifer. Over the last few years, we were able to raise our presence in the US to almost 1.8 gigawatts. So this is a significant presence that we have in the US. So with Mr. Biden taking position in the US, I think beyond also the renewable energy sector, I think we'll have alignments when it comes on the climate change agenda. Masdar, we are proud that we will be part of the UAE delegation in COP26 that will take place in the UK by end of the year. So climate change is a very important file for the UAE, and UAE is taking a lot of steps internally here in the UAE to reduce our carbon footprint and internationally through the climate change negotiations.
And Caspar, moving on to you, I would like you to speak about some of the ways in which technology is helping reduce some energy-intensive activities in the Middle East, notably desalination, for instance, which consumes a significant chunk of power, particularly in the GCC. How can energy systems be developed to reduce the intensity of energy being consumed through desalination, for instance?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, the Middle East uses a lot of desalination. This is true, and it's true that it does bring water, but at the same time, it's of course extremely energy intensive for two reasons. I mean, one is any big water plant uses a lot of pumps. Pumps use a lot of energy. This is one, and second, of course, there is the reverse osmosis itself. That uses a lot of electricity as well. So what we've done in places like El Galala in Egypt, this is one of the big desalination plants in the Red Sea, is reduce that energy consumption, primarily by using variable speed drive technology that takes down your consumption, the overall cost of the liter of water produced by about 10%. That's actually quite meaningful because it means that the water produced is at the same level of cost as drinking water and hence becomes competitive, right? We use similar technology, I mean, not just in desalination, but also in water treatment plants. A particular point in pride is that I was told it's the largest treatment plant in the world. It's also in Egypt, Jabal Al-Asfar. It's apparently bigger than the one in Mexico City. So you have to imagine a city like Cairo, 22 million people being supplied by this particularly large treatment plant. And in it, again, I mean, by using also a software layer that sits on top of the entire plant, by analyzing the data, putting in preventive maintenance, etc., we're able to reduce the energy consumption significantly. So the point here is that you can bring that down 20, 30% in a plant like the one I just described. You can get the cost of water in a desalination plant down. These are important numbers, especially at scale, given the scarceness of water in this region. and it plays a role in bringing overall the energy consumption of this region down. Yeah.
Thank you, Caspar. We have about 10 minutes left, and I'd like to invite the panelists to keep the comments brief. Moving to Ahmed, we're now seeing, you've mentioned hydrogen, and we're seeing a lot of conversation happening this year around hydrogen and the possible emergence of the Middle East as a hub for the export of this clean fuel, both blue and green hydrogen. And Saudi Arabia's Energy Minister, Prince Abdulaziz, said last year that the kingdom was putting together a hydrogen strategy. And Abu Dhabi, for instance, is marshalling its biggest players in forming a hydrogen alliance. Is this technology commercially feasible? How long before we can see this scaled up and as a viable alternative to oil?
So I think hydrogen is really an exciting topic. In the last 3 years, it's gained tremendous credibility. And that is because of three factors. One is the incredible reduction in the renewable energy costs globally. Number two is the maturity of the hydrogen technology. So it has been amazing how it's kind of been not noticed by the analysts, but hydrogen technology has matured tremendously over the last 10 years. And finally, the third, I would say, is the carbon intensity imperative, the reduction of emissions. So those three have created a perfect storm to make really the hydrogen's time to come. Many have predicted hydrogen many years. Maybe we've had 3 dawns for hydrogen, I think, in the 70s and the 90s, and then again in the 2000s. And now I think this is the true sun is finally rising. We're seeing that the competitiveness of the technology, fuel cell costs, which is the main technology that utilizes hydrogen, are becoming economic. We're seeing vehicles on the streets with such as the Hyundai Nexo, the Toyota Mirai, trucks now. And we're seeing economic competitiveness. Now, it's not yet competitive at the costs of hydrogen production today because of infrastructure costs. Hydrogen produced in a central location is very competitive, actually. We, in the oil and gas industry, produce about 75% of the hydrogen in the world, mainly for use in our own refineries. We know the cost of hydrogen is very competitive, but the challenge is moving it to the consumer. And that's where all the work that has to be done today is putting in the infrastructure to deliver that hydrogen from the production to the user economically. And so that was the logic behind our blue ammonia project, which was demonstrating that ammonia could be a competitive means to transfer renewable or decarbonized hydrocarbons to markets. I think it's that kind of work that we're doing right now, which will enable hydrogen at scale and therefore economically competitive with hydrocarbons. The advantage of diesel and oil has been its fungibility, its ability to transfer at a low cost. If we can transfer that same energy in a hydrogen or a hydrogen carrier like ammonia, we will get the same value from our hydrocarbons. And that's the point that Jean-François was saying. We have a tremendous capability or resource in the kingdom, not just in the production of low-cost hydrocarbons, but also in low-cost decarbonization of hydrocarbons. We have tremendous resources to capture the carbon and sequester it. We also have tremendous resources to produce the lowest cost renewable hydrogen in the world in the form of renewable energy to hydrogen, again, because of the low cost of renewables. You heard the NEOM project, where we have a tremendous, the world's biggest, basically, hydrogen project from renewables being announced. I think, personally, that there is a huge synergy between these projects, and that's because renewables have one big challenge that we still have not resolved, and that's capacity factor, utilization factor. It's because of the lack of storage. So the costs are inflated, even though the renewable prices are low, but they're not available all the time. So that combining the decarbonized hydrocarbons with the renewable hydrogen, I believe will give the Gulf region the lowest, most cost competitive, low carbon hydrogen in the world. And that's what we're hoping to do with our partners here in the region.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Yousif to quickly jump in and share his thoughts on developing the hydrogen economy here in the UAE on the back of the pilot projects that you are initiating as Masdar, as well as on the back of these lines, if you could share your thoughts on that.
Jennifer, I think UAE and Saudi Arabia and GCC in general, being countries that have oil and gas heritage, this really gave us the right infrastructure to pioneer the hydrogen business. And looking at the future, I think hydrogen will start with the blue hydrogen. Today, the green hydrogen is still expensive. Blue hydrogen makes sense, and we are well positioned with our experience in the oil and gas. Companies like Aramco and Adel could potentially lead the production of hydrogen. So what we are doing now, we're trying to create the awareness about the importance and the use of hydrogen through the pilot project that we want to do here in Masdar.
Thank you, Yousif. We're nearly at the end of our discussion, but before we go, I'd like to have the thoughts of our panelists on possible net zero commitments from here in the Middle East. And I'm going to turn to Her Excellency. Now, Jordan has taken the lead on so many renewable energy initiatives. Could reaching net zero as a country be a possible future goal? And if so, when can we expect to see that?
Thank you for the question. Well, going from fuel-based to zero carbon emissions or a net zero emissions is a long way. We've started partially, and we've reached today like 20% of our electricity being generated from renewables. Far from reaching net zero emissions, as we're still using lots of fuel in our industries, transportation, electricity generation. But yet, we are very ambitious. We have been once ambitious in 2014 when we set a goal in 2020 to reach 20% of renewable energy. And here we are today, yes, achieving that. And we've set a goal for 2025 to reach 25%, and we're going to reach that, I think, ahead of time. So in order to move to net zero, and I don't think we will reach that very soon, but we have to work very hard. We are working on several paths, and I believe the first most important thing for any country in the world is to move towards more energy efficiency. And this is very important because I think it's the cheapest way for us to move towards less carbon emissions, or even eventually for a net zero carbon emissions. Also, we're working heavily on today moving towards electric vehicles, and meanwhile even we're thinking of introducing gas vehicles, which is less carbon emissions than using diesel and gasoline. In order to do all this, we have a plan, and our plan involves a national energy efficiency action plan, and there is a renewable energy action plan, and we hope gradually that we will be able to be one of the first countries who get there. One of the reasons is the need, like maybe we don't have the luxury of oil producing countries, whether we would use the oil or the gas that we produce versus other kind of resources. So we don't have that resource, and that's why we have an extra motive and more reasons to go towards more resources that are more taking us to net zero emissions.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We have about 3 minutes left. I'd like to Put the same question to the other panelists, and if you can keep your comments briefly to about 30 to 45 seconds, that would be great. Caspar, Schneider Electric took the pledge to become, to reach net zero last year. What are your thoughts on governments in this region reaching that goal?
Yeah, it's clearly a journey, both for the region and for us. Last year, accelerated our goal from 2030 to 2025, by 5 years. And we also committed to net zero operational emissions by 20, net zero supply chain by 2050. Right? So I think it's important to set the goal. I like to also continue to focus on efficiency as something that we can all do as a company, as governments, and as individuals. Learning more about the impact of energy.
Thank you. Jean-François, your thoughts?
Well, very briefly, I think the net zero emission is still, of course, a fairly long way away, as Her Excellency mentioned, but it is quite feasible. I think the Minister of of Energy of the UAE yesterday was mentioning that they were hoping to reach 70% net zero by 2030. It's very ambitious, but the problem, of course, of the region is that it's almost easy to reach net zero for their own production, but since they're exporters, what happens to the stuff from exporters? Is that net zero or not? And that's where it's important for them to have that technology which they are developing and which they can sell along with the oil to become net zero and increase income in many ways. So it's a commercial proposition as well. But I think net zero will happen, not like BP or Shell, but Saudi Aramco one of these days will come up with the possibility of net zero for their own production within the kingdom. Whether they can do 7 million barrels a day exported at net zero, that's something we shall see, but then they will have the technology to go with it, as I mentioned. So thank you.
Thanks. Ahmed, your thoughts?
So I'm not going to comment on the commitment to a net zero. I'll let Jean-François, but I can say one thing. We are closer to net zero than any other major oil producer. For our scope 1 and 2, as I said before, our existing emissions are far below our peers. And I believe that given the renewable resources we have in the kingdom and our carbon capture resources, I believe if we needed to be, we could also be the most competitive in a net zero world. Now, will the world get to net zero in the timeframes people are talking? I personally believe it's going to be very challenging without some new technologies, and we're working hard on some of those new technologies. I mentioned carbon capture. I'd like to mention also direct air capture. We are working on direct air capture, which could be a major breakthrough for the world, and it is needed because, as the IPCC said, we cannot meet the net zero without negative emissions. And so technology is needed, and we're working on those kinds of technologies. So that's what I'd just like to end with. Thank you.
Tgoing to. That's all we have time for, unfortunately. It's been a great discussion. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. I'm going to hand this over back to Edna. And thanks again. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Jennifer, big thanks to you. Thank you so much there. Tremendous panel on the role of the Middle East and North Africa in the energy transition. And great dialogue there, great focus on what's going on. Hydrogen coming up a lot, and surprise, surprise, technology driving the way. What did you take away there?